Good afternoon. This is Sean Golding with Golding and Golding, here to discuss the basics of the difference between two very common terms you'll come across in the exciting world of international tax, which is expatriation and expat. The terms are similar, but they mean entirely two different things, especially when it comes to how the U.S. government is going to treat you for tax purposes. So it's super important that you're made aware of the differences. So, expatriation is a formalized event in which a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident who has been a lawful permanent resident for at least 8 of the last 15 years decides to formally relinquish their U.S. status. The way they do that is if they are a green card holder, then they go ahead and typically they file an I-407, but there are some other ways to do it as well. When you're a U.S. citizen, the U.S. government doesn't want to see you go, so they make it incredibly difficult. you have to do it from overseas. So you got to find a consulate to do it with. You got to make an appointment. You got to fill out a whole bunch of forms. Then you got to fill them out again normally when you get there because they use a different version of the form. Then you got to make a whole bunch of copies. They send you home. Make sure you think about it. You go back. You take the oath, and then you're done. If you're a covered expatriate, this is an analysis that you should do in the planning phase before the actual expatriating event, which are the two events we just spoke about, the I-407 or the taking the oath and just going into the foreign consulate. If you're a covered expatriate, then you may have an exit tax consequence at the time that you expatriate when you're filing your final tax return subsequent year. We have other videos on that. I don't want to waste everyone's time on that, but just keep in mind that once you do the expatriating event, that's the end. You can't take that back, so you want to make sure you plan ahead of time before doing that. So expatriation, you give up your U.S. status, you renounce your citizenship, you relinquish your green card. Unless you're a covered expatriate, that's the end of the road for you, which is a good thing if you don't want to pay tax in the U.S., and quite frankly, who wants to pay tax in the U.S. if you don't have to? If you're an expat, all that really means is you're living outside of the U.S. So Jim and Jane decide, you know what, we're bored of the United States. We're going to go pick up and travel across the world, and we're going to land somewhere in Brazil or Ecuador or Peru or somewhere and just be out of the U.S. for a while. And that's great. They're expats, right? They're outside of the United States. That's where they live. That moving outside of the U.S. is not a formalized event. So they're still U.S. persons. Green card holder moves outside the U.S. and their green card doesn't get renewed, just letting it expire is not an expatriating event. They're expats. Why does this matter? Who cares, right? The main problem is if you're still a U.S. person, doesn't matter where you live, right? The U.S. is going to tax you on your worldwide income. They're going to make you report all of your foreign assets, accounts, and investments on a whole host of boring, annoying, tedious forms. Expatriate doesn't have to do that anymore. They're gone. You as an expat just living outside of the U.S. where you still have that requirement. So if you're living outside of the U.S. and you're an expat, what can you do to kind of minimize the tax? Well, there are various tools you can use. There's the foreign earned income exclusion, which basically says if you live outside of the U.S. for a significant amount of time, meet the physical presence test or the bona fide residence test, you can exclude a portion of your income each year. It's currently, I think it's about $106,000 or $107,000, plus you can deduct some of the housing depending on how much you pay in housing. Super important thing to keep in mind, especially with passport denial, revocation, and suspension, is that if you don't file the form, the IRS doesn't know that you qualify for it. So plenty of people go, hey, I was at some bar, an expat bar, and David the expat told me I don't need to file it because it's less than $106,000, so who cares? I'm not going to be stuck with any tax, right? And that makes sense, except if the IRS starts filing substituted returns for you, your tax that starts getting up there, then when you're ready to take that trip to come home, for your buddy's big reunion or wedding, and they stop you at the airport because your tax liability shows $300,000 over the past 10 years because you've never filed the forms. Something to keep in mind. If you're a permanent resident, also you may be able to qualify for treaty benefits and be treated as a non-resident for tax purposes, but that's a whole other thing. Something to keep in mind, quick practice tip for any attorneys or other tax professionals out there. If you're already a lawful permanent resident, let's say you've been one for 9 years and you want to kind of plan to avoid the covered expatriate status, Once you're a long-term lawful permanent resident and you file that Form 8833, that is your expatriating event. You can't take that back. So it's important to not just go forward and start filing Form 8833s, especially if you're already a lawful permanent resident. If you're living outside of the U.S. and you're seeking to expatriate, or you're out of the U.S. and you haven't filed taxes for many years, reported the necessary forms, there's plenty of good programs that can safely help you get back into the compliance. There's the Voluntary Disclosure Program, VDP. There's the Streamlined Filing Compliance Procedures. The Streamlined Foreign Program is for people who reside outside of the U.S., meet the foreign resident requirement. They have no penalties at all and can file original tax returns in the program. There's also the Streamlined Domestic Offshore Procedures. There's the Delinquency Procedures and Reasonable Cause. We have lots of free information available on our websites, goldinglawyers.com, expatriationlawyers.com. And we also have, if you want to, you can reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation if you think it's appropriate. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.